And if someone in the upper room would also speak back to us just for fun.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
I can indeed, so thank you for that quick sound check. I appreciate it. So with that, we will come to order. Thank you, committee, and everyone who is attending and following along. We will take final action on a few bills towards the end of our meeting today. One thing I'd like to get crossed off of our list does look at the approval of minutes. The chairman has forgotten to mention that on previous meetings, so you may notice there are a few sets of minutes that we have. I'd ask if anyone has any additions or corrections. Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any additions or corrections, but I would move to approve the minutes of January 25th, 27th, February 1st, 3rd, 8th, 10th, and 15th.
Thank you, Representative. Do I have a second? Seconded by Representative Dodson. I think I will skip debate on that unless there is anything that is pressing. Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve minutes say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes and the minutes are approved, and thanks to the committee assistant for putting all of those together. That will move us to our first item of business, which is a hearing on House Bill 2399, which deals with amortizing the state and school CAPERS unfunded actuarial liability. We'll start with an overview from the reviser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. House Bill 2399 would amortize the CAPERS unfunded actuarial liability of the state of Kansas and school participating employers that exists under the system over a period of 24 years, commencing December 31, 2018, and requires the CAPERS Board of Trustees to certify employer contribution rates for the state and school group based on the new amortization schedule. And part of the reason why it looks back at December 31st of 2018 is that's the valuation in which the initial FY 2022 contribution rates were established. So then to effectuate the FY 2022, that it's going to be based on that valuation. The bill also eliminates level dollar employer contribution payments of $6.4 million and $19.4 million per year. That were scheduled to be paid over 20 years that were placed in statute after employer contributions were delayed by the legislature in FY 2017 and FY 2019. New section 1 of the bill is the kind of the budget mechanism to realize the FY 2022 savings due to reamortization, by saying that if any legislation that amortizes the unfunded liability for Kansas and the state of Kansas and school participating employers is passed by the legislature and enacted into law, then the amount in each account of the state general fund of each state agency that is appropriated for fiscal year 2022 that is equal to the difference between the amount budgeted for employer contributions under current law and the amount required for employer contributions under the new amortization period. That difference, so kind of that lesser amount would be lapsed from the fiscal year 2022 budget. And that's what provides some of the savings under the governor's budget plan. The same procedure would take place to reduce expenditure limitations for special revenue funds in the state treasury during fiscal year 2022 as well. And the bill is effective upon publication in the statute book, July 1st, 2021. And this is a similar bill as was in last year's bill. It's a 25-year period at that point, but 2503. So it's very similar to what you might have seen last year in terms of the procedure. I can stay for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Committee, any questions for the reviser? And not seeing any, and you'll have to, was there a question? Not seeing any, you'll have to wave wildly in the other room or make a sound for you to come up on the screen for us also to make sure that we recognize you if needed. But thank you for the overview. And I believe we'll dispatch formally with the fiscal note, since the author of the fiscal note is also one of our proponents. And if it is appropriate and you'd like to either start with the fiscal note or go straight into the proponent testimony, I would let that be at your discretion, and we would welcome the Director of the Budget, Adam Proffitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. As mentioned, my name is Adam Proffitt. I am the Director of the Budget for the state of Kansas. I do not, and I should, given my title, I should have a copy of the fiscal note with me, but I don't have the official copy. I have, of course, read it a few times, as mentioned, authored and signed it as well, so happy to answer any questions. I'll be sure to touch on some of that during my testimony, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair. Okay, very good. That's okay. So I stand before the committee here respectfully as a proponent of House Bill 2399. As mentioned by the reviser, this would reamortize the current unfunded actuarial liability, or UAL, as I'll refer to it throughout my testimony, for a period of 24 years, which represents a 10-year extension from the current schedule. As also noted, this was part of the governor's budget recommendation. I would call it a key component of the governor's recommended budget. Something that we think helps provide budget stability and predictability in the years to come for the state budget. So as we move forward, given the reasons why we are a proponent of it and put this out there, pre-COVID, if we think back to where things were, the economy was doing very well. We were experiencing really historic levels of unemployment. I think we were at 2.8% unemployment as a state right before the pandemic hit. And then, of course, March happened. And once March happened all across the country, and specifically in Kansas as well, things kind of came to a halt and revenues have declined. We've been able to weather the storm that's brought to date, in large part because this body and the governor have put together some budgets that have put us in a good position to be able to handle some things like that. And while the revenues are showing signs of improvement, we still need to exercise extreme caution as we move forward because things are still a bit uncertain. Revenues have kind of been up and down, and you've seen moving targets. So we need to be very judicious with our expenditures. I think that's evidenced by the fact that in the governor's budget, the starting point was a 10% reduced resource package for most of the SGF-funded agencies. But we also need to identify areas of savings in the SGF, and that's where this bill comes into play, as it does identify an area of savings for the SGF. It also provides us a good opportunity to make sure that we're making contributions as we move forward throughout the amortization period for the unfunded actuarial liability, and I'll touch on that in just a bit. So as it relates to the revenues, extending the payments does reduce the amount of SGF that's required to fund the UAL in the coming years. There is a cost for it, with it to be sure, and I'll touch on that a bit later, but it does free up some SGF immediately. On page 2 of my testimony, you'll find a chart that compares the current payment schedule and SGF requirements for the contributions versus what they would be under this reamortization. You can see that in fiscal 22, under the current plan, we are projected to contribute over $658 million to the UAL. If we are to reamortize, as is proposed in this bill, that contribution goes down to $499 million, specifically for the state and school groups. That's an SGF savings of $158.7 million in the first year of the reamortization period. And then over the next couple of years, that savings grows to $160 million, $166 million, and then $173.4 million in fiscal 25. So again, we get some immediate relief in SGF that we can free up to spend on some precious resources and services for Kansans across the state. But also, this provides a more manageable level of employer contribution rates under the current schedule. And what that means is the way we fund this is on a percent of salary basis. So right now we are scheduled to be at 15% contribution rates for fiscal year 22 under the current schedule, 15.1 I believe. Under amortization, we're able to bring that down by over 3 percentage points. So in fiscal 22, on that same chart that I referenced earlier, you can see that again, the current baseline is 15.1%, what we're to contribute. Under the reamortization plan, that drops down to 11.92%, so over 3 percentage point drop. And the reason that is important is because it makes it more likely that as we go forward, we're able to maintain the payments as we're committed to each and every year. It's important because if you just look back at fiscal year 17 and fiscal year 19, the state actually skipped or reduced the payment into the KPERS pension plan against the UAL that we were supposed to make. So anytime you skip a payment with the UAL, you're completely eroding any benefit that you have with the current amortization schedule that you have. All you're doing is adding debt onto the back end, which I realize we're doing that with amortization anyway, but you're moving that debt to the back end without any of the other tangible benefits that we're speaking about here. So skipping a payment is a very dangerous and clearly a very tempting proposition for us to do, as we've done it a couple of times just over the last 5 fiscal years. By keeping the contribution rates lower, it just maintains a better sense of confidence that we're going to be able to make those payments as we move forward. One other point to consider is that while the KPERS board has, they did a study on this, and I believe Mr. Conroy's in the room and he can speak to this quite a bit better than I can. They did a study on the merits of amortization in 2020, and they did decide at that point in time that it was not the right time to re-amortize. But I would say that many pension plans across the country do re-amortize these when you get within about 10 years of the maturity date. So it seems likely that the KPERS board might choose to re-amortize at some point in the near future anyways, as we near that 10-year mark or the 80% funded ratio. So the proposition to do it now pulls that forward by a couple of years, admittedly, ahead of what they would have recommended last year, but it allows us to take advantage of freeing up the SGF today, and it allows us to take advantage of the more manageable contribution rates as we move forward today while we continue to be in this global pandemic. So we can wait for a couple of years and do it along the regular schedule once we hit that 80% funded ratio, if that's what they choose to do, or we can pull that schedule up to now, and again, take advantage of the immediate benefits that are out there as we re-amortize KPERS. With that, Mr. Chair, that does conclude my testimony. I will touch on the fiscal note, if that's okay. I'm going from memory here. I think the first question is going to be, what is the total cost of this? I did talk a lot about the savings that we're going to realize, $158 million the first year, up to $173, $174 million in a couple of years. It does extend the payments by 10 years. There is a cost with that. So the total contributions to the UAL over the course of 24 years under this plan versus the 14 remaining years is about $4.6 billion more than the current schedule. It's important to note that that's against the current schedule. So again, if we do go out and re-amortize here in a couple of years, once we hit that 80% funded ratio, there's going to be a cost associated with that as well. I don't have that cost with me, but the true comparison of what the real cost of doing it now would be to compare that against what the cost is against if we re-amortize in a couple of years. So $4.6 billion does sound like a large number. It is a large number over a period of time, but again, that's not comparing to what if we would re-amortize in a couple of years. So we do realize immediate SGF savings for the first 14 years. Beyond that, it is SGF expenditures that we are not currently planning to have in the budget, but likely will at some point in time. With that, Mr. Chair, I would stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony and covering the fiscal note as well. Committee questions? Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming in front of us today. My concern has always been if we did nothing, what is our level of sustainability in the next couple of years to keep paying what we are doing now? I don't think we can maintain that in the budget without drastic changes.
Sure. Thank you for the question, Representative. It's, as I mentioned during my testimony, we did miss payments in 2017 and 2019. I don't believe they were fully missed payments. They were reductions against the current, or at that point, current schedule. The payments over the next couple of years do approach $1 billion that we'll have to contribute against the UAL, and that number, quite honestly, as I look at the budget in the out years, that seems like a big chunk for us to undertake. To reach $1 billion under the reamortization, it's going to be many, many years before we hit that, and that's a large cliff that would be difficult to get to in the coming years.
I also spoke, I think, briefly with you yesterday and with Mr. Conroy about looking at level payments, you know, and changing it a little bit in years and stuff. And I will say that thanks to Mr. Conroy, he has written back with some numbers and things. And what is your feeling? Can you give the numbers on what it would cost? Would it cost more to do level payments? Would it cost less to do level payments? Up front, it may be less, it'd be more later, or upfront it's more and then it's less?
If it's all right with you, Madam Representative, I would prefer to let Mr. Conroy answer to that question if he's okay with that and if the chair is okay. I just got the information that you gave me.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to review it once it's finalized and we have it
Okay.
run, but I think Mr. Conroy would be far better suited to answer that.
I'm sure he has it memorized. Thank you.
I bet so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And do we want to hold that for your testimony later, or do you wish to answer that now, Director Conroy? Join us.
Good afternoon, committee. The request was to look at level dollar payments, which currently we're on a percent level of pay. So it escalates, it assumes salary increases go up. It's designed, it's kind of like an escalating mortgage on a house, while level dollar is probably closer to just a fixed mortgage rate, and that's what it is. We did have our actuary, at Representative Neighbors' request, do some calculations, and that would, and I guess what the run we had to do was add 10 years on the amortization, but make it level dollar so that that amount is fixed. And so that would start out by saving about, the first year about $51 million. And then then it increases from there up to about 100 million until you get, of course, the closer you get to the adding on those 10 years, then it goes the other way. Over the savings in the first 5 years, though, if you want to focus on that, under the governor's proposal, it saves $968 million in those first 5 years. Under this 24-year level dollar, it saves $437 million from the baseline. And so, of course, again, you're adding 10 years, so there's costs associated with that. So hopefully that responds to your question.
Thank you. And I just think it helps the committee to have something to compare to and kind of a baseline. So that's why I had that done. And I thank the chairman for allowing me to do that. Thank you.
Further questions, committee? Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure whether this is for Director Profit or for Alan, but is my thinking on the payment on how this plan is working, not counting the level payment plan, but what we're paying each year, the payments that we're due, is based on the amount of interest on that year. Is that correct? We're paying the interest every year until finally that interest is interest on the profit, on the principal, right? And so that's why it's a sliding scale rather than a set scale. So I'm kind of liking that solid payment schedule, just trying to get our government to pay that kind of thing. I mean, it'd be that same kind of thing. I'd kind of like to go along with the David Ramsey process of what the governor is doing, of maybe cutting back everything 10%, cut back and get lean. That's what he would say. And then he would say, go after all those loans and double payment on all those loans. And so we would double payment the interest until we finally paid them off early rather than paying them off in 14 years or 24 years. So at this point, you know, I don't see the point of going to 24. I would rather go with 7. So just passing that on. Thank you.
I think he would also start that by saying beans and rice, rice and beans, if I'm not mistaken. I do have a response, if that's okay. And thank you to Mr. Conroy for being willing to step up here and explain that. I just got the printout, so I've not yet studied it. I would also mention, going back to my opening remarks, this House Bill 2399 does reflect what the governor's budget recommendation shows. So again, there were many cuts to many agencies that try to stay lean, try to preserve some of the core services and fund what we thought was absolutely necessary for Kansans across the state. and also try to maintain that 7.5% ending balance that is required by statute. So any deviation from the current bill, House Bill 2399, albeit still a savings with this level dollar reamortization over 24 years, does leave a gap of about $100 million of ending balance for us to consider. Just put that out there for the committees to noodle on.
Thank you. Representative Neighbor.
And I would go back, the reason I had done this because I had some concern about sustainability, but when we look at what Mr. Conroy brought back to us, I think the sustainability issue comes back to me. And the stable payment sounds good, but we have so many things that we have to address right now. And some of those, I know we've all been through a lot of, with the Department of Labor. We have got aging equipment that if we cut, we're only hurting Kansans across the state. That's not something that's going to go in their pocket. It's something that we're going to have to pay. And I think there are a lot of discussions to be had on this issue. It's not an easy issue, but it's kind of like pay now or pay later. And I know it was turned down last year, but we are making some strides. But we've got a lot more strides to make. And I think rather than going and cutting everything, 10%, 5%, whatever it may be, are we putting ourselves in a no-win situation? That's my concern. And I think we will be at a level, if we don't do something, where we can't afford to pay any of it until then we're in fault. And that's not what we want to do. So thank you, and just that was my rationale. Thank you.
Other questions, committee? Representative Dodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Couple of points. Can you opine why we were unable to pay the bills?
Are you referencing the fiscal 17 and fiscal 19 missed payments? I could opine. I would say there were some revenue shortfalls in those years that we were trying to make up, and I believe that was one tool in the budget toolbox to be able to have some cash flow.
I guess I'm trying to equate this to my own budget, maybe. That would be one that I'd probably pay. Second, is this like a mortgage? In other words, if I've got a mortgage today at 5.5 and I want a new mortgage because I want lower monthly payments, so I go down and shop around and I get a 2.75. So my monthly payments are way down, but I only had 12 years left on the mortgage and now I've got 18 more. Is this about the same thing we're doing?
I would say that's a fair analogy outside of the 3-point savings that you're getting there. I don't see a 3 percentage point savings on this reamortization. It's truly just extending the time frame by which we're going to repay it. So it'll be the same percentage, just extending it for cash flow purposes.
But in this case, in your case, you end up paying more money.
Yes, in the long run, yes, sir.
Okay. I was trying to do just some quick math there. I mean, we had 40-year initial, which took us out to 2036, I think. Is that right, from 2035? So in that, I think you had the amount under that curve to be $13 billion or something. And then this one, which went back to 2021, came forward, was 4.6 billion. So I was trying to figure out if we were getting some kind of an interest savings that we ought to be aware of there. I mean, is that the implication that you're getting a better rate now?
No, sir, I would say, and again, Mr. Conroy will certainly be capable of correcting me if I misspeak, but it's less about the interest savings, because I do not believe there would be an interest savings, and it's more about free cash flow today.
Yeah.
When we're in a budget crunch today, you know, things are, we're needing it right now.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Further questions? I have a few, so I'll take a minute or two along the way. And there are some things that we agree on, so maybe I'll actually start towards the end and work back up. I do agree that at some point, it makes sense to reamortize in that particularly with a level percent of payroll amortization, which sets those increasing payments not only on the interest cost, but on an assumption that payroll increases over time, both by the number hired and the rate at which they're paid. So it makes your payments at the end of the amortization period meaningfully higher than at the beginning of the amortization period. So for example, should Capers do something like lower their assumed investment rate of return to something like, oh, just to see if I can make the director's eyes get big, 5%. That would be a huge new liability that we hadn't anticipated, and it would be common to do a level percent of payroll amortization to ease into that, but figure out how you're going to eat that elephant over time. The discussion that was brought up here, where we're looking at a liability that we already know, one of our challenges in re-amortizing using the same method is it lowers those payments initially, and again, gets to a larger payment further out. The level payment is one that does intrigue me at the time that the board might direct us to look at when we want to shave that mountaintop off, because I would readily agree and grant that going to $1 billion and then down to under 100 million the next year is not a direction we'd want to go long term. So it is a topic for the board to continue to look at and figure out. As I look at this one, right now, you'd shown that we would be scheduled to pay $658 million, and that would go to $499 million. Are you aware of a number that we refer to, back to Representative Riley's point, of what the interest rate and the cost of a year of service is? So what the incremental cost for a year is that a number that's floated through your office?
I do not have that with me right now. No, sir, I'm sorry.
And there's no reason it necessarily should. It's one that I bother the director for, and it's $626 million. So that's what we kind of call our steady state number, $626 million. And the director can correct me if I'm materially off on that. But for many years, and I really thank another conferee who is here to give us history, and history is important. I'm sorry to dwell on it too long. But when I got here in 2010, we were hoping to get to $300 million annual payment on Capers, and it looked difficult, and it was not nearly sufficient to meet it, and we saw that mountain that we had to climb. And now you see we're at $658 million, which is materially different than that one, but that's how that schedule was set in that growth over time. But 626 is where we tread water. So $1 more than that pays a little bit of principal, gets past the interest, and $1 less than that goes the other way and would be what we refer to as negative amortization. So then as I worked through that, that's where I wanted to get a sense. We've gotten to 658, which is 42 million above that steady state. And I think as we look towards eventually looking at level amortization, we'd look at how much of that principal do we want to pay off each year, so that if we're going to do it over 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we knock it down. But it's going to be something like a mortgage that we start slowly paying down so it's gone over time. And I have a hesitancy to go to that. And that's why the question related to that steady state number, and I'm making more of a statement, but if you have something in response to the negative amortization, I'd welcome that.
I do not, Mr. Chair. There is negative amortization with this one. You are correct for the first.
So thank you. And that would go on for maybe the first 10 years, and then it would turn back positive?
I was trying to track the numbers here. It's between 8 and 11. My number's over there.
Okay. By the time, and so we'd build for a while, and then we'd get back to reducing the debt. So that was a concern that I had. You mentioned the missed payments. Can you refresh my memory on what the missed payment was in 2019?
I don't remember each of the years. I know between the 2 years, it was 258 million. I think one was about 2/3 of that, and the other was about 1/3. So what we did with the missed payments then is we included what's called a layering payment, and it is on a level dollar of $25.8 million over a period of time.
So thank you, and yeah, I was not a fan of layering, and we did it a number of times, so I'm willing to criticize that with you also. And there were missed payments. If my recollection is correct in 19, and I'll look to the director, while there was a layered payment that may have been missed in that, we did make the actuarial payment, and in addition, I think we paid off a partial layering and a full layering. So I think the total payments in 2019 were 859 million, north of the number. So while it may be possible to be correct in saying there is a missed payment, my interest over time has been how many total dollars get into the fund. And if I should have had another 6 million for the missed payment on the layering to be around 865 million rather than 859, that'd be great, but I'd rather get 859 in, missing a 6 million payment than asking for 499 and getting it. So that is my concern on the payments. Representative Neighbor.
I was on general government budget when some of those things were being looked at. And it was done in quarters. And so in certain quarters, the amount that should have been spent or paid was not spent. And Capers funds then were used as a bank for the general budget. And so a lot of those things, I think, have built interest over time, those payments, because they weren't totally done, or we didn't have all of it done, and it happened for about 3.5 to 4 years. So there, we caught up with 16, 17, but we had not, I think there was even one missed in 17 that was left over, I'm not sure, but 18 and 19, I know. We just didn't do it. And we did offer to have that done on a quicker basis, but appropriations denied that funding. So
And I'll also grant that there are other years prior to 17 that might have been more egregious misses. I'll actually argue further on 19, but I won't take the committee's time with it at the moment. So, but thank you on that. The point, many plans do re-amortize, and that's true, and it will make sense for ours at some point. As I've observed other plans, I have seen them do similar things where they do re-amortize and they do a new level percent of payroll amortization. And I would argue that's a model that we may not want to follow of the negative amortization and the proverbial kicking the can where that grows further on. But while that does exist, I don't know that that's one that I would want. But another point you made that I do agree with, so re-amortize at some point. The level dollar, I think at some point makes sense. And we do have to compare the cost to the eventual reamortization, because I do believe, even if it's 3 years before the last thing, that at some point we level that off and we don't just go over a ginormous cliff, and there would be some cost to that. Nonetheless, my other concerns would be larger. So, but thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Representative Howe.
Mr. Chairman, appreciate the chance to ask a few questions. How would this affect intergenerational equity? And by that, I mean, you know, the perpetual kicking the can down the road to future taxpayers. What types of things did you look at as you considered this amortization proposal as it relates to, you know, future taxpayers of Kansas?
Thank you for the question, Representative. I would start by saying, and I know you didn't ask this, but I want to make sure I'm clear because I missed it in my remarks, that for starters, by re-amortizing, there is no impact on member benefits, either current retirees or future retirees as we see it. So that would be, you know, I want to make sure that we allay any concerns on that front. As it relates to generations down the road, yes, there are going to be, again, financial commitments beyond the original end date of the current amortization schedule. Again, if the board chooses to reamortize here in a couple of years, those are going to exist at some level as well. And if you kind of extrapolate out what SGF or the state revenues are right now and what the payments against the schedule are, it doesn't appear as though the CAPER's contributions grow as a percent to SGF or state revenues over time.
Thank you for the response. Also had a question about to Mr. Conroy, if you will, about how this would affect Tier 3 CAPER's people.
On terms of impact on CAPERS 3, I do not believe it would make, it would not be a material impact on CAPERS 3 membership. The plan design on that is such that really the employee contributions carry almost all of the actuarial cost of the benefit plan design in CAPERS 3. So this would not, reamortizing or not, again, would not impact benefits of active or retired people. And of course, in terms of pension funding, the risk is all to the employer. So whatever the employees contribute, whatever investment income comes in, and then the plug factor is the employer contributions. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Conroy and Mr. Profit, for your time today.
Thank you, Representative. Other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Director Profit, for spending time with us, et cetera. And based on what I think I remember from last year, I think you got off fairly easy on that, except I did a disservice. I should have had Director Conroy's informational piece so you didn't have to answer all of our other questions as I jumped into the fiscal note details. But thank you.
Quite all right. Thank you for the time.
Committee. Is there anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent? Seeing none, I would like to step back to the informational and then welcome our opponent testimony after that. So if we can shift from Director Profit to Director Conroy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, and I guess clearly, not only is Mr. Profit a budget director, I believe he'd also qualify as an actuary too. So my hat's off to him in terms of wading through all of this CAPERS information. And I guess I'd just maybe also comment that maybe CAPERS employer contributions up until this year has been on a diet of rice and beans or beans and rice since they've not been at the actuarial required rate. But the governor in her recommendation today for this year's budget after 25 years gets us to that actuarially required rate. So that's certainly progress. And then if I could circle back to Representative Neighbor, I did, as I was set back down there, just in terms of that level dollar payment, just to give you, in terms of total contributions, as was talked about, we're currently around 700 million and eventually, of course, going out 15 years, and there'll be lots of inflation and things changing over 15 years. But the current estimates, to get it over $900 million. Level dollar of pay then would get it down to about 660 million. And there it fluctuates a little bit because of assumed some demographic changes, but it's going to stay in that $600 million range all the way out over, adding over the next 24 years. So that is sort of the magic of level dollars. It caps it. It is like a fixed house payment, and so it draws that down. Mr. Chairman, if I may, and I've got some rather detailed testimony that has lots of good information and some graphs that show the tsunami of the unfunded actuarial liability if you re-amortize that $4.6 billion. So that's all there. But in my written testimony, there's a two-pager high-level kind of policy. It's the last 2 pages of my written testimony that looks at CAPERS funding policy. And just to give you that, having an unfunded actuarial liability is not a bad thing. It's part of pension funding. It's part of plan design. It's assumed that it will be there. Of course, certainly, it's larger than we would like, and there's, lots of reasons for that. There have been those missed or lower than actuarially required contributions, which is really the largest single factor. Of course, some big market downturns in 2001 and 2008. There were some unfunded benefit enhancements and certainly some actuarial assumption changes through the years. So again, as was indicated, the Board of Trustees periodically reviews the amortization schedule as they do all of the actuarial assumptions and investment policies, and they do that currently every 3 years. And so I guess amortization, as I like to say, is not a 4-letter word. There's nothing wrong with it. Again, it's part of solid pension funding. But this amortization that we have, or this unfunded actuarial liability we have, started in 1993, 40-year period, has been discussed. It's a level percent of pay. It's certainly a sound actuarial methodology, but it is that point. You start out low and you go high. And that was one of the decisions, of course, in 1993 when there were substantial, significant benefit increases. And the legislature at that time decided that the employers would pay all that. They could have asked the employees for additional contributions, but the decision was all employer financed, and it would all, and so to keep the cost down, that was one of the decisions to go to level percent of pay. Amortization is currently a delegated Board of Trustees responsibility. The legislature delegated that to the board in 2004. It's really about a year-long process where they look at the asset liabilities. They do an asset liability study on the investment, which is the first 6 months, and the last 6 months, they look at all the actuarial information, the demographics, and all of that to finally come up to, and amortization is only one part of that study. Demographics, salaries, and assumed rate of return on the investments are all part of that study. And again, it's very important, we probably can't say it enough, amortization, reamortization does not impact KPERS retiree, their benefits. They are safe, they are sound, and they will continue to be paid. Again, periodically it will be studied. The closer you get to paying it off, there can be lots of volatility from one year to the next. So if you get within that 10-year window, again, the employer contribution is that plug factor. And so you've got to, so there could be big swings, not only for the state, but for all those 1,500 local units of government out there. As if there's a big downturn in the market, the employer contribution rate would go up considerably, because now you only have 10 years or 8 years or 7 years to get to that point of extinguishing it around 2033, 2035. The governor's proposal adds those 10 years, as you've talked. Under the current plan, it adds $4.6 billion to that. Again, I don't know whether it's, that's might be a little apples to oranges, because again, presumably the Board of Trustees will look at reamortization here in the near future. And so clearly there will be costs associated with that, depending on what they would do. They may look at some other things other than just adding on 10 years. So that $4.6 million figure clearly would be, if you're comparing to what the board might eventually do, maybe in a couple years to current law, clearly there would be a cost there, and it would eat into that $4.6 billion. But the point of doing it now is, we're at 70% funded. Again, great progress. We were at state school, we were at 56% funded back in 2012. There's been yeoman's work in terms of the legislature improving that funding, increased employer contributions, KPERS 3, $1 billion in pension obligation bonds, all of that on that steady march to improve that funding, and that's gotten us to that 70%. This would slow down, I believe, that progress some. I guess the chart there on that very last page, currently with all the assumptions, we're supposed to get to 80% in 2026. This would push it out to 2034, so it slows it down. And again, the lower the funded ratio, the more susceptible you are to swings in the economy or in the market. So I think Representative Neighbor may have mentioned the magic words. It's kind of pay me now or pay me even more later. It does save $968 million under the governor's proposal in the next 5 years, which is a considerable amount. But of course, again, like that mortgage on the house, pay less now, you pay more later. Anyway, I know there's some other good conferees and be glad to respond to any questions, but glad to do that at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Director Conroy. You may have mentioned it, and I didn't completely catch it. Did the board weigh in with any communication that is appropriate to share?
They did, and basically it was stay the course. And it was sort of like reamortization will happen, but I think their position would be, it'd be better if the funding position of KPERS was stronger, that we were closer to or at, or let's say that 80% figure on the way to 100. 80% is not the stopping point, of course, but we want to get to the 100%. But the board did send a letter to the governor and to the legislative leadership suggesting that perhaps now is not the best time for reamortization.
Thank you. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In regard to that last question, the board doesn't have to consider themselves with SGF issues, do they?
They do not.
Thank you.
Yep.
Further questions, committee? Representative Dodson.
Mr. Chair, I was looking at the contributions chart that you had in here, the one that either from the state or from the employer. The blue line, we hit 800 million on that blue line in 2028. And then it goes to something 980, 990 million. Now, the only thing that red line does is push that out about 11 years. I mean, you get back to the same place. You get an 800 million line, and then you get 980 million or so near the end of its amortization. So I'm wondering, getting back to the chair's comment earlier, if there isn't a schedule that's someplace between, if you look back into 2023 or something, if there isn't a rate back in there where between that red and blue line that pulls down the end so that you don't get, let's say you don't make it back to more than about 850 million.
If that happens and you don't, in terms of those employer contributions stay less than that, that's right. Well, then under the current methodology, it will just keep adding on. That line really would continue to go up, and it would be something higher than the $900 million under the current schedule of pushing it out 10 years and being at that.
What I meant is if they contributed more between these two lines.
And that's a great thing. And yes, KPERS is always open for that kind of business. And the legislature has, as was indicated, there have been some sort of catch-up payments, I guess, that were made here several years ago that helped close that gap. The pension bonds helped close that gap. That's right. So it spins it down. And again, the actual assumption, everything that's not paid, the assumption is we're charging our going rate of 7.75%.
Right.
So,
thank you very much.
Further questions, committee? And thanks for that discussion, and the charts that you have give us a chance to look at that, and if there was a way to just level that off, because it does show, and the scale kind of collapses it a little. There is that mountain and a cliff, and would agree that if we can smooth that out in the future, that would be something that we would look at.
I'm sorry, in the graphs there and all that testimony, there is one, but you can see it just shifts it, out 10 years, and it stays up high, and then it goes down.
So thank you, Director Conroy, for the information as always. With that, we will move to our first opponent and would welcome to the committee, Jerry Betker, former Capers trustee, leader across the state, and thank you for taking time to come back to the committee. Tell us just a little bit so that we can appreciate why you're here. I don't think you're a lobbyist. I don't think anybody pays you.
No. But, I've got quite a bit invested in this operation in terms of time and hours spent in the past. The interesting thing to me is these issues do not go away. They may be lesser or worse or less, more serious here and less serious there, but they simply do not go away. Just a little bit of background and history on myself. I am a Kansas native. I born and grew up at Beloit, Kansas. I have a nuclear engineering degree from Kansas State. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a laboratory, so I decided I didn't want to do that. And I went to graduate school at MIT and got a master's degree in something called industrial management. Then I took a real fork in the road and took a job in New York City with a brokerage firm and got into the investment business, and that was my home for 17 years in New York and in Kansas City. That led me to a series of financially related time spent and so forth and so on. I'm a director of a bank, for example, now. But I did as regards to, just one other thing I wanted to say. I have a fairly long history at K-State as a volunteer in the Alumni Association, the foundation, and so forth. And so I am following that part of your mission as closely as I can too, because these are indeed difficult times for everyone with some tough decisions that are going to have to be made. Anyway, and one more thing about K-State. Here is an opportunity that a lot of people don't know even exists. If you're over 60 and can get the permission of the professor, you can take a class. I've taken 17 of them, and I loved it. You know Barry Flinchbaugh? The name is familiar to some of you anyway. Okay, well, I took Barry, I know somehow or other I knew Barry, and I was taking his class, and I was sitting clear up in the corner. It's a classic lecture class, 115 students, and I had broken my ankle, fell out of a tree, believe it or not. So I was sitting clear in the back of the room because I had to have a little knee thing, put my knee in to get around. So anyway, one of the students asked Dr. Flinchbaugh, asked him a question down the front. He paused and he says, I don't know. He says, why don't you ask that old man up there in the corner? And let me tell you, the students loved that. And let's see, Barry's he's gone now. I think we have lost it doesn't mean anything to the subject matter today, and I'll just get away from that. Anyway, I was appointed as trustee initially by Governor Finney, and then by 4 or 3 other governors. So I went through over a period of 17 years. We were dealing with a lot of, we meaning the trustees, were dealing with a lot of lawsuits and stuff like that in the early 1990s, and I became a part of that, and most of that was resolved with an awful lot of discussion, but not a lot of real progress. So I think that's an unfortunate period of Capers history. I was appointed to the Board of Regents in 2008 and actually served in both capacities, trustee of Capers and Regents for 1 year. then my term ran out. And I was chairperson of the audit committee. One other personal note, I was involved with KBA, Kansas Bioscience Authority, which you may or may not recall. They've been gone for a while now. I was chair of the audit committee. I was interviewed extensively by investigative type auditors. They didn't find anything, but nevertheless, KBA disappeared, which I think is real. It's a very long story, and I don't want to go any forth. But now we get to capers. It is very important to have a sense of history on capers. It's not easily acquired. It doesn't mean that you don't have biases, and I think we all do, but capers, this is deja vu. This is all over again for me. These funding issues have been addressed or tried to address, and actually the plan that the system's operating under now was put together, I hope I'm right here, in 2012. And that was a real, and I testified for that bill, by the way. It was a watershed event because it really mapped out the future, which and many people don't want to talk about. They want to talk about next month or whatever, and if you're in politics, maybe next year or the election or whatever's going to happen. But it just goes on and on and on. And it's kind of like, so what else is new? There's not history. We have a long list of failures of the legislature to adequately fund the plan. We have a long history of a whole series of governors. Some did a little more, some did a little less, but the pattern was the same. It's easy to, let me try to correct one thing that I think I see in the newspaper as much as anything, but you are not saving money by putting something off. You're just increasing the bill for somebody down the road. I motivated me to, you can get this on the computers now, but this is my math table book that I had when I was in school at K-State. And interestingly, one of the things, it was published in the 1950s, actually. And one of the interesting things in there is that the compound interest table ends at 7%. It doesn't go beyond 7. It stops. Because at that time period, that was a high rate. Well, rates aren't that high today, I'd certainly admit, but they were quite a bit higher not too long ago. And so I don't think we want to get lulled to sleep in any way just because market interest rates are historically low. They are. Now, can we survive? We'll see. We've got a very good person, I think, at the Federal Reserve, and support Treasury. Janet Yellen as Secretary of Treasury is an enormous asset, but still, this is just not a new story. We have a whole long list of failures of the legislature to adequately fund the plan. Sometimes the governor is involved more or less. It just isn't new. And so the funding ratio has, as Alan pointed out, the funding ratio has improved. You're still ahead. Not too many years ago, Kansas was ranked 49th in terms of funded ratio of their retirement systems, second only to the state of Illinois. The state of Illinois is technically, anyway, bankrupt. And there are some other things. That's a whole other story. The governor had a similar proposal a year ago. That bill did not make it. Spending, just in my illustration, I forgot. 7% compound interest rate over 20 years, interest on $1. What is it cumulatively? Huh? It's almost 5. So you save $1 today and you spend 20 years from now. Now, what kind of responsibility is that? I think the legislature does have a responsibility to consider possible future outcomes. So, but it's just not going to help. So you're not going to save any money. You just kick it down the road. Our time horizons are all too frequently too short. I think we really have to make sure that we have a consideration of the long-term impact on funding CAPERS. That exceeds short-term funding needs very significantly, and my recommendation is to vote no. Thank you. Any questions you might have? Oh, by the way, I'd like to compliment Alan and the actuary. I have suggested, I don't know whether it's ever been done. You ever had the actuary come? You have here? Not for a long time. Well, anyway, it was a lady at the time. Is it still her? Whew. She's smart. You won't take you very long to figure that out. Anyway, that would be my recommendation. You might consider that option sometime in the future. Questions? Any?
So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We do have a few questions. I want to thank you for coming, for just paying attention to this issue and being motivated to take time out of your day to come here, and also to thank you for serving on the CAPERS board from 91 to 2008. That's a long term.
Yes, it is.
And we appreciate your history and the perspective that's there.
But, you know,
We appreciate all of the perspectives that are there, but thank you for coming.
I have one little personal story. We're involved in a few lawsuits and so forth. I had my deposition taken by the attorneys for the other side. And the attorney spent the whole morning interviewing me on my qualifications and so forth and so on. And then we went to lunch and came back, and he says, okay, I think we got through that. Now, he says, I think I now understand why the governor chose to appoint you. What I don't know is, why did you want to do it? And I said, the first thing came in my head, you know, frankly, I said, I thought it might be fun. He said, his next words were, this, God knows how expensive an attorney, said, that's all the questions I have for this witness. He didn't go anywhere. So my suggestion would be, if you're ever trapped in a deposition like that, tell the truth. Sometimes it works. It did for me. Thank you.
A couple of questions. We'll start with
Okay.
Representative Proctor and then Miller.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you, sir, for your testimony. It was really, really powerful. I think that you laid out in really stark terms the financial irresponsibility of kicking the can down the road and taking out a loan on the bank at Capers. I wonder if you could take just a moment, I mean, because you've just got this incredible lifetime of public service, just to speak to the kind of the moral responsibility that we have to all those public retirees in the future to keep this system sound.
Well, I had one personal experience I'd use as an example. Tried to be active I live in Manhattan, by the way, now. We're very delighted to have you there, by the way. But anyway, I was on the CAPERS board when we still lived in Beloit. We moved down here in 2008. But I periodically went to the teachers. They had monthly meetings and so forth and so on. And I said, they said the concern was that it was ill-founded, but the concern was still there. The teachers were concerned about their retirement benefit being cut. And I said, I don't think that's going to happen. And they said, well, why do you say that? I says, well, number one, there's a provision in the state constitution. And number two, if that would happen, I'm going to contact my friends and ex-cohorts in the investment business, and we're going to build a new condo building in Topeka for all the trial lawyers that are going to move here. because that's, so I say, it's just not going to happen. You know, but the publicity every once in a while, unfortunately, can get twisted and misunderstood. So that you can actually frighten a retired teacher who's been retired for 10 years or something like that, and say, well, what if are they going to cut my benefit? The answer to that is no.
Thank you. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too want to thank you for your testimony, congratulate you for your public service. I knew Dr. Flinchbaugh pretty well. He was more of an entertainer than he was a professor, I think. Your illustration of borrowing $1 ending up costing you $5, would you suggest that no one buy a home unless they can pay cash?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Would you suggest, based on your illustration, that you borrow $1, you end up spending $5, but would you suggest then that no one buy a home unless they can pay cash for it?
No, I would not.
And yet,
there are rules extensively more rigid than involve getting a mortgage, not having to pay cash. I'm not against borrowing money. I'm not against it, but the part of the answer is you got to have a whole series of things and assumptions that are made about your ability to pay and what the penalties are if you don't, what the benefits are if you pay it early, which sometimes I tell you that my nicest personal day ever was in about 1998, I think, or 99 or something or other. I paid off my house mortgage.
But
I was glad to get rid of it.
The same thing is true, however, that when you take a long-term loan to purchase a home, it's going to, over time, the total is going to cost you substantially more than if you paid cash. But
oh, of course,
there are situations where that's just not possible, or else no one could buy a home if they.
No one could buy a home.
Right.
That's right.
Thank you.
That's right. Yeah.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you for taking time.
Thank you very much.
Our next opponent, Ernie Claudel, a current trustee. So we thank him also for his service as a trustee, although he'll have to disclaim that before continuing with his testimony. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. As you can see there, and as I've said before, I lobby for the Kansas Coalition of Public Retirees and the Kansas Association of Retired School Personnel. I have to say the disclaimer that I am an elected member of the Board of Trustees, but the positions expressed in this testimony are mine and those of CARSP and KCPR. They are not in any way represent the views of the Capers Board of Trustees, nor do I speak to them. The last time that we testified against this bill, my predecessor here, I did not get to hear him at that time, and I was because I had to go on, and I'm impressed. Thank you very much for your service. This is my 8th year as trustee elected school, and I have been what I call chasing capers since 2004. I got interested in it because I was at a point a licensed securities salesman, and I spent 33 years in the public schools in the classroom and as a building administrator. And I got interested in this stuff, and I just couldn't ever get away from it. We would oppose, and I would oppose this this idea of re-amortization at this point. It has been stated that it would cost $4.6 billion more over time, extend 10 years. What this bill does is pass is it starts the underfunding of capers all over again. And that is the UAL, the unfunded actuarial liability, is actually the elephant in the room. And the main cause of that is the failure to meet the actuarial contribution over time. In fact, the normal cost, if that was not for that debt, that legacy debt, the normal cost to you, to the state on their part of the keeper's employer contribution would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million, as opposed to the 700 and whatever we're talking about now. That's what that does. This would start that all over again. My perspective, of course, in all this is from the employee's position. And I'm really concerned. The action moves the 80% funding if this was approved. And I thought it was from 2029 to 2036. I thought I heard the director say today 2044. Whatever it is, it's a long time. We have never, the employees under Capers 1 and 2 have truly been compensated what they were promised, but they've never really realized, been able to realize any profit, if you will, from their investment, which has always been constant. I also mentioned in previous testimony that we are interested, of course, in the COLA, and this 80% goal, whether it is comes into 2029 as is suspected, or would be improved by other contributions. The last excuse or explanation for not considering that goal for us was that it was not 80% funded. The other thing I have concern about, quite honestly, is I have heard a question. To my knowledge, I've tried to explain this to the powers to be, but I've not heard any kind of question about anybody's future in Capers except for the Tier 3 today. That question was given, and I haven't heard anybody else be concerned about the Capers people. And if you were and I misunderstood what you said, I apologize for that. The other thing is that the actuary provided us with figures, believe it was last year, that it would, I guess a common thought would be if there was less to pay, even though it was a longer time, it would more likely be paid. And apparently the actuary shared with us that the statistics actually are the probability of the payment being made is a question of time. I mean, of amount of time, it's not an amount. In other words, the longer it takes to pay off something, the less likely it is to be paid off, statistics say. For those reasons, I'm vehemently opposed to re-amortizing this. I think that the Capers is an extremely complex system, which the previous gentleman there stated, and it's been moving in the right direction from the last several years, and I don't think we can. I don't think it's wise to put that progress in jeopardy by starting this underfunding all over again. And I'd be happy to stand for questions. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and the committee, for listening.
For your testimony, are there questions, committee? Seeing none. Oh, Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Claudel, for coming in and testifying today. I I'm very, very, very concerned about those CAPERS 1, 2, and Tier 3 beneficiaries. So I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk specifically just about how this is going to impact those earlier CAPERS program members.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I am not sure, but I know we are leading the United States in not having any kind of a benefit increase. And like I said, I won't bore you with all the stories, but the last, I was told very directly that we weren't going to talk about this until we reached 80%. If this were done, I don't know when the 80% would ever arise again. And so it's been 23 years, 20, depending on the last total program-wide benefit increase that was permanent was active in 97. So however, and the bill was actually 98. So however you calculate that, 23, 24 years since there's been any kind of benefit increase. Prior to that time, there was 16, and there was also 5 bonuses. And our best estimate is that we've lost 54% of our buying power over that period of time. I hope that answered your question, sir, and thank you.
It does. Thank you.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony and for taking time to join the committee.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else wishing to appear as an opponent of House Bill 2399? And anyone neutral or anyone else at all on 2399? Hearing none, we will close the hearing. Thanks to everyone for participating. Committee, thank you for your attention. I realize I have not managed our time and questions well. We still have most of our business ahead of us and our time is up. I hope that everyone is able to continue to hang with us. For the sake of our conferees, I would like to move to our other hearing, which is House Bill 2218. After that, I have 2 or 3 bills that I do want us to work, one of them being 2218. So we will work through that process, but we'll open the hearing on 2218 and ask for an overview from the reviser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee. House Bill 2218 changes the membership of the Kansas State Employees Healthcare Commission, and it amends KSA 75-6502. Section 1 amends the statute pertaining to the composition of the Kansas State Employees Healthcare Commission. Under current law, the commission is comprised of 5 members: the Commissioner of Insurance, the Secretary of Administration, a current state employee in the classified service under the Kansas Civil Service Act who is appointed by the governor, a person who retired from a position in the classified service under the Kansas Civil Service Act who is appointed by the governor, and a representative of the general public who is appointed by the governor. The bill would change the requirements of the current state employee from being a current employee in the classified service to being a current employee who is currently enrolled in the group medical insurance plan of the state healthcare benefits program. And the bill would also change the requirements of the retired employee from being an individual who retired from the classified service to being an individual who retired from state service and who is currently enrolled in the group medical insurance plan of the state healthcare benefits program. And I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Reviser. Are there questions for the Reviser? Hearing none, thank you for the overview. The fiscal note is also insignificant, so we will move to our proponent testimony and welcome Natalie Yoza with the President of the State Health Plan Employee Advisory Committee. Thank you for your patience to stay with committee.
Hi, my name is Natalie Yoza. Can you hear me? There's my video. Okay.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
I am a state employee and I am currently serving as president of the Employee Advisory Committee. The Healthcare Commission established our group, which we call the EAC, to help them develop policies surrounding the state employees' health plan. We have 18 active state employee members and 3 retirees. And our directive when we're looking for membership is to try to get as diverse as we can. So we're trying to reach state employees in every branch. We're trying within the executive branch to get diversity between small agencies and big agencies. We're also looking for age and demographic diversity because we're trying to get our fingers out as far as we can to best represent what state employees are and what their needs are. We are in support of this bill and hope you will vote in favor of it because the current restriction on membership for the employee and the retiree members for the Healthcare Commission just no longer reflects the state workforce. So if you go back to 2000, this statute was last amended in 1992. So I could only get data on the employee composition going back to 2000, but we had 20,000 classified employees at that time, and that has dropped down to under 6,000. And there's been a corresponding shift. So in 2000, there were only 2,000 unclassified employees, and now we've got over 13, close to 13,000. And those are executive branch. They don't include the regents, which are all unclassified now too. And so restricting the employee member for the Healthcare Commission to classified service and the retiree member to classified service is really not as representative of what the workforce is as we would like. And I would add that right now, both commissioners that are serving in those positions are enrolled on the health plan, but that requirement wasn't in statute. And we feel like they're really there to give the boots on the ground experience about what their health plan experience is like. And so just adding that requirement to the statute would be beneficial long-term. So I'd finally add that the Healthcare Commission also looked at this and is unanimously in support of it. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you for your work on the bill, for working to bring it to us, and for being with us today. Committee questions. Representative Riley.
For committee, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the committee's knowledge, could you briefly explain the difference between classified and unclassified for those folks that are not government employees?
Sure. The Classified Civil Service Act is a state law that I guess brought extra protections to some employees and had some statutory requirements for their hiring. I was never in classified service, so I'm probably not the best person to answer that, but unclassified is more an at-will employee, which you would be more familiar with. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Representative, and for the answer. Other questions? Seeing, do you have one, Representative Miller?
I have a question for you. Are you wanting to move this bill today?
Thank you. When we close the hearing, I would like to move this bill today if the committee is open to that. Thank you. Are there other questions on the proponent testimony before us? And knowing that we do want to move the bill today, do think about your questions if you have them. Oh, thank you. Representative Berquist.
Yes, and for the conferee, just one more clarification. And in your description of the change, am I making that noise? Okay. Okay. In your description, you described that it would be the non-classified not instead of the classified, but either classified or not classified, correct?
That's correct.
All
We're
right.
open it up so that everyone is eligible.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you again for your testimony. And we may, if you care to continue to listen on, we may take your bill up first so you can hear us continue the debate in the committee if you wish. With that, we do also have written testimony from Sarah LaFrenz, and if she is on and wants to provide testimony, or if there is anyone else wishing to appear as a proponent. Seeing none, I would direct the committee's attention to that testimony that we do have. Is there anyone wishing to appear as an opponent of 2218? Anyone neutral? And anyone else at all? Hearing none, we will close the hearing. So thank you, committee. I would actually like to take action on both of the bills that we have heard, as well as the bonding bill yet today. So with that, I think I would ask the committee's wishes on the bill we just heard on 2218. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move the rules be suspended, that House Bill 2218 be advanced for debate, possible amendment, and final action.
Motion by Representative Miller, seconded by Representative Berquist. Is that who I heard?
Yes, sir.
So thanks for the motion and the second. This is a procedural and non-debatable motion. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. So we are now able to consider the action on 2218. Wishes of the committee, Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this bill, as it is brought to us today, certainly shows the endeavor for transparency and to be more inclusive and to open it up to the general public or those members who maybe did not have that opportunity. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would move that we pass House Bill 2218 out favorably.
Motion by Representative Neighbor, seconded by Representative Bishop. Further discussion on the motion? Question, Representative Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just clarifying something here. Are legislators considered state employees?
So legislators would be state employees. I'd assume
my
we
question.
would be unclassified state employees. So I don't know our eligibility to serve in this capacity. So I don't know if our comparee is still on and has further clarification, or if anyone who brought the bill or the reviser would have clarification. And I don't know if that's part of your question or not. So I might look to our reviser as we look to legislators as state employees. Would we be qualified to participate on this board? I didn't say it right.
Mr. Chair, I'm looking up that answer right now, if you can give me a moment.
Thank you. We'll give the reviser a moment. Is there any, we'll return to the item. Is there any other question or discussion? None at the moment. We will await the answer. We'll have Director Conroy play the Jeopardy music while we wait.
Mr. Chair, I've looked up the definition of legislator, and in a most unhelpful way, the statute defines a legislator as a member of the legislature. It doesn't actually speak to whether a legislator is a state employee or not. The bill itself, the statute 75-6502, does state that a state officer or employee may not be appointed as the member representative of the general public. So a legislator is precluded from being that person in the fifth position. But more so than anything, I think that regardless of the individual's status as a legislator, the individual would have to be currently enrolled in the state benefits program and also be nominated or appointed by the governor. If you can bear with me, I will do some more research overnight and get an answer definitely back to the committee. But as of right now, I think the statute is silent on the issue.
I don't have a firm answer for you, Representative Riley, and I don't know that we'll have the opportunity for that so thank you. Other questions or discussion on the bill before us, 2218? If not, Representative Neighbor, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I close.
Heard the motion by Representative Neighbor to pass 2218 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So the ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Representative Riley is recorded as no. Any others wish to have their vote recorded? Thank you, committee. The next item of business I would like us to take up is House Bill 2405, which is the bill dealing with bonding. I will have the reviser give us a quick overview of that. I don't know that we need to go deep into the bill. We will remember that there is a technical amendment that the reviser had mentioned that we would take up later. But Mr. Reviser Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, House Bill 2405. This is the $1 billion pension obligation bonds to finance a portion of the unfunded actual liability of KPERS. The bonds would have to be issued by approved by the State Finance Council, except there is a cap on the interest rate at 3.5%. If it's above that, then the bonds can't be issued. The bonds would not be indebtedness or obligation of KPERS, and the state nor the Department of Administration would have the power to pledge the full faith and credit or taxing power of the state for debt service, and debt service would be subject to, dependent on appropriations by the legislature to pay that debt service. It would be up to that. It would not be on KPERS to do that. And there was the 2015 issuance of $1 billion bond. This is very much similar, except that was capped at 5%, and again, this is at 3.5% interest rate.
So thank you. Committee questions for the reviser? Representative Riley.
Very quick question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what was the amount again for the cost of that bond? I remember we covered that, just was like to briefly ask that question again.
Thank you, and I might ask Mr. McMurray to address that question.
I'm going to answer as if you hit the cap of 3.5% all-inclusive costs. The annual debt service is estimated to be $54.4 million a year.
Thank you. And Representative, was it the debt service or was it the cost of issuance? Issuance.
Cost of issuance on a $1 billion transaction modeled based off our actual experience in 2015 is a little over $5 million.
Are there any questions at this moment for the revisor in the review? If there are none, thanks for that. And that brings us forward for discussion, which is probably the best place for us to start on this particular bill. Mr. McMurray, at some point I might ask if you have a summary of the Monte Carlo. It doesn't have to be right now, but looking at assumptions using the 7.5 return and the 5.2, I think were the two that you had. I'd just be curious if you have a summary of the percent chance of outperforming the bond rate with those two Monte Carlo assumptions if you have time. But I would start committee with discussion, and then we would look for a motion as you wish to go forward. I know this is a big topic, so I don't necessarily have to start with the motion, although I'm willing. Representative Miller.
Would you object to the making of an amendment at this point?
No, I would not.
I would ask the revisor to forward to the committee secretary, if he hasn't done that already, what I would call the Miller Amendment. I won't tell the origin of that name.
And you may explain in process, or if you want the revisor to go over, it's at your call.
I'm going to give a 1 or 2 sentence description, but then I think it would be helpful if he walked through the balloon. The balloon incorporates the provisions of House Bill 2289, which very briefly would mirror this bill as it relates to the borrowing aspect. It would differ from this bill in that the arbitrage would be dedicated towards a 13th check for certain retirees. I'll give more detail of that in a moment. There is also some amendments in the balloon that were the result of Mr. Conroy's office reviewing 2289 and offering some suggestions. With that, I'd ask David to fill in the blanks, please.
Mr. Chairman, I can do that. I believe the copy of the balloon has been emailed to the members, but I can also walk through it real fast on the screen here. On the first page, this is just kind of to let that there will be now sort of 2 purposes for the issuance of the bonds, the unfunded liability, and then also the actual liability related to the 13 check benefits that are in section 2 of the bill here, beginning of the amendment, beginning on page 3. This is all of this new language. This is taken from, as Representative Miller said, this is kind of the baseline from 2289, except there is one couple changes in how the Capers Board of Trustees, they'll actually only certify the investment earnings on the proceeds of the bond issued pursuant to section 1, not the debt service. That's outside of their purview. It's going to be through the Department of Administration, and that's in C1 of section 2 here on the balloon. And then there is also a cap in subsection D. This is different than in 2289. So subsection D would cap the retirement dividend payment. That 13 check would be capped at the retirement's monthly retirement benefits, pension only repayments. So even if you take the arbitrage and you want to do the calculations, and you would say give $1,000 benefit to all retirements, that'd be like the per retirement amounts. If, for example, there was a retirement that has a $500 a month recurring monthly retirement benefit, they would get only $500 a month. They'd be capped at that amount. And then I think everything else is the same from 2289. There is also a floor on the benefit if for some reason they want to do the calculations on the arbitrage divided by the retirements. And it's going to end up with less than $25 as the benefit. Then I'm not sure what that was, sir. I'm sorry. But I think that is the substance of the amendment, Mr. Chairman. If Representative Miller wants to add anything also.
Thank you. Anything additional, Representative Miller?
Not at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any questions for the reviser? So I believe that this is, you've made a motion to amend as well. Motion to amend by Representative Miller, seconded by Representative Finney. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Representative Howe?
Representative
Yes.
Howe in the other room. Is this germane to the bill? Is this amendment germane?
So thank you for the question. In the committee process, it would be allowed to offer this amendment, and I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Other questions? If there is no further question on the amendment, Representative, you may close.
Somebody have? I think that means this amendment is out of this world. And you did call on me to close. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to point out that for as long as I can recall, and I do have a shorter memory today than I once did, but nonetheless, for some time now, state employees have been asking for, and I believe are in need of, a cost of living adjustment. That's what they've been asking for. I do want to clarify to the committee that the structure that's offered here is not a pure cost of living increase, which if a cost of living was given, it would be embedded in the base, and they would get that from then on every year. This is set up in common parlance. It's referred to as a 13th check, meaning they get their regular payments and then they get an additional check using the arbitrage, the profit, the difference, if you will, between bond payments, bond service, and investment income. This summer, when we once again heard from retirees during our pension interim committee that they were looking for a COLA, the response was, well, we have no revenue. So with that in mind, I started scratching my head on how we might develop a revenue source, and this is what I came up with. It's not a guarantee. It will not necessarily always be there because it's going to depend on true earnings. But at least it will provide a source of revenue for those times when we can give some relief for people who are longtime retirees. The bill is structured at this point, and I'm certainly open as it works its way through the process to modification, but it would apply to all retirees who have been retired for at least 10 years and whose monthly pension is $2,000 a month or less. That would cover about 40,870 people per the numbers that I got from Mr. Conroy. And it would come at a cost of approximately, if everyone received a full check, and they wouldn't necessarily get it, that's what it would cap it out at, is the equivalent of one check and no more. And if it was fully funded at that rate, it would cost annually $34,600,000. Again, numbers garnered from Mr. Conroy's office. That would still leave 64,750 people who would not be getting a check. And I would like to have the bill set up so everyone got it, but I think it should be directed until we see the success of the program towards those people who need it the most. And that's what it was designed to address. I don't want to take up a lot of time. I know I already have, and I very much appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chair, that the hearing on the other bill gave us an opportunity to have this idea presented on the table. I would move my amendment. I thank you again.
Thank you. Committee, you've heard the motion by Representative Miller to amend 2405. I am going to step to the door so I can hear both rooms on the vote, in that I think it will be split, and I'll try and come up with a take from that. So hang just one moment.
Mr. Chairman, I sit in this room on the other days, and what we've decided is just easy to take a hand count initially, because that's the only way we can see the people on the screen as well. It's just a suggestion.
Hey, David, please, what do you want him to do? Hey, David, please remove sharing.
If each person who is in their office will turn on their monitor and state their yes or no vote.
Yes. Finney, yes.
Representative Finney votes yes.
Mr. Chair, did you get my yes vote?
Representative Parker.
Representative Parker votes yes. Do we have any others on the screen? To the committee secretary, what is our total tally? On a vote of 8, well, so actually we got to back that up. On a vote to 8, it ties. The chair votes no, because I did count myself in the other room, which was wrong. So I apologize for that. 8 to 8, the chair votes no, and the motion to amend fails. So thank you, Representative.
I believe we have some evidence of a fraudulent election, but nonetheless. Could I be recorded as voting aye?
Yes. Representative Miller records aye. Representative Bishop records aye. Representative Neighbor records aye. Are you recorded nay? Representative Riley records nay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have my vote recorded as yea.
Is that Representative Parker?
Proctor.
Representative Proctor votes aye, would like his vote recorded. Representative Toplicker would like his vote recorded as aye. Representative Parker would like his vote recorded as aye. Representative Finney would like her vote recorded as aye. I was moving entirely too fast. I would have been slowed down on the floor moving at that rate. Did our secretary have a chance to get all of those down? That would be consistent with what I saw. Would you like to read them back so that we know that everyone is? I might ask you to take a microphone for a moment.
Representative Toplicker, Miller, Proctor, Bishop, Parker, Neighbor, and Finney all to be recorded yes, and Representative Riley to be recorded no.
Is anyone still wishing to be recorded that was not on the list? Seeing none, thank you for working through that, and thank you for a questionable process, but I hope we do agree on the final tally. So anyway, Representative Miller.
Did I hear you right? We had a technical amendment?
That is correct.
I would move that amendment.
Mr. Weiss, can you go through the technical amendment with us?
You need a second, sir.
Seconded by Representative Neighbor. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just give me 1 second. Okay, Mr. Chairman, Jan sent this to Jan if she could email it out to the members at her convenience. It's pretty straightforward. It's going to be just a sentence I forgot to add when I was putting this in from the previous 500 million and the $1 billion bond issuance. It's going to be page 1, line 24, right after the 3.5% sentence. We insert a sentence. The bonds and interest thereon issued pursuant to this section shall be payable for monies appropriated by the state for such purpose. It's really just something that got dropped on there, and I don't want it to be seen as there's some intent to not put that in there versus the others. It was really just my error. So that's the technical amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the reviser? Hearing none, I think I accepted a second, but I don't think I ever accepted a motion. I think all we said was to distribute it. I don't know if the motion was moved, actually. So Representative Miller accepts the motion to move, and we did have the motion to second, so thank you. Any discussion? There's no discussion. Representative Miller, you may close.
I move the amendment.
Heard the motion by Representative Miller to amend. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. So we do have the technical amendment there. Other discussion on the bill? Everybody knows where they are. I have one possibility, just to confuse the issue further, because I don't think this is quite difficult enough. So something that I thought about is in listening to the discussion of rates, et cetera, the larger the issue, we can put some pressure on rate, but I wondered if we would want to step how we move into the bond. So for example, if we allowed an issue of up to $1 billion at 3.5%, would we be willing to allow $500 million or $500 million up to 3.75? That is something that reflects my tolerance for risk in investing in the bond to say, okay, if I can get $1 billion that cheaply, I'll do it. I get a little nervous myself at 4% on that, but I'm a little lower. Those caps are really important for us to consider in the committee for what our appetite for risk is if we have a desire for the strategy at all. So I do have an amendment that Revisor Weiss has drawn that would provide that step to say it's $1 billion. If we're not under 3.5, then that's not issued, but we would allow an issue of up to $500 million for up to 3.75. And I might informally ask if there's appetite in the committee to confuse it further with that, or if it's confusing enough to deal with an arbitrage bond and call it good with what's on the table. In the interim, I would ask Mr. McMurray if there's any concern with implementing a strategy that is directed as such, or if that's just as clean as the single level bill.
I don't have any reservations about that as long as it's clear and set from the beginning of the onset of the transaction.
I will ask, the amendment is up if I see correctly. I will move that amendment and see if anyone cares to second the motion. Representative Dodson falls on the sword. Thank you, Representative Dodson. Is there any further question for the revisor or discussion on the amendment with the additional step? Hearing none. What's that? Representative Parker, thank you, and please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and apologize for belaboring this a little bit. I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. The original bill is looking at $1 billion. This is looking at 500,000. So is this only doing 500,000 if the interest rate is there, or is this an additional 500,000 if the interest rate is right?
So the short answer would be no to both. It's actually looking at the billion up to 3.5. If it exceeds 3.5, the billion's off the table. So it's not additional, but up to 3.75, we would allow 500 million or half the size at an incremental rate to borrow, taking some of the risk off the table. But not being certain that I want to lose the whole thing between the 3.5% and 4% level.
Thank you. That makes more sense. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the question. Other questions or discussion? If there is none, I will close on that motion and welcome the committee's feedback on whether this is helpful or hurtful. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. I might ask Representative Berquist, did I miss the balance in the other room? I believe online and here.
There was no dissenting votes. It was all aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So Motion passes, and that amendment is added. With that, we are back on the bill. Discussion? Representative Croft, would you make a motion to pass favorably as amended?
Mr. Chairman.
I heard a name. Is it Representative Howe?
It is, I'm sorry. I had a question.
Please.
I know we talked about this the other day, but I can't quite remember. We talked about timing and an entry point and when, how much time, if this were to be enacted, would it take for KPERS to work through the process again?
So thank you, and I might ask the director to address that. And I know that it can vary from a fairly short time to longer. And then we also would be looking at an entry point sometime in 3 months out to August, depending on our timing of when the bond is let. So some period from now and then from then forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's correct. Once the proceeds, if they come to KPERS, they would be distributed across the assets, the different asset mix within the KPERS Trust Fund. And of course, half roughly are U.S. equities, about half are international equities. So those could be placed rather quickly. Then you get into the other ones, particularly private equity. And real estate would take longer for placement of that, but it would all be done under the current asset mix as set out by the board. So it would take some time for it all to be placed, but quite a bit. We'd do it just as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for the question. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee pass out favorably House Bill 2405 as amended.
Second.
Seconded. I'll take the one on the screen. Was that Representative Howe?
Howe.
So
yes,
thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman. Yep.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion to pass favorably as amended? Hearing none, Representative, you may close.
I close.
All right, I think this one may be close again. I'm not sure. I may step to the door to take the vote and see if I'm able to hear everybody. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And not being a tie, the chair doesn't vote this time. So I think we should have 16 votes if everyone's voting. And what is the tally? So 3 to 13, the motion passes. So Representative Riley would like to be recorded as a no. Anyone else who would like to have their vote recorded? Hearing none, thank you, committee. So with that, and the other item that I'd like us to consider that's fresh in our minds, if we're able to, is 2399, the governor's re-amortization plan. So to do that, I would ask for a motion to consider. Representative Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to suspend the rules and consider House Bill 2399 for passage.
Seconded by Representative Amel, Berquist, thank you. Again, procedural motion. All of those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. On the bill, Representative Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To allow the full chamber the opportunity to hear the governor's request, I move the committee pass House Bill 2399 out without recommendation.
Second.
Motion by Representative Croft and seconded by, if you'd state a name.
Berquist.
Representative Berquist. Thank you, representatives. Discussion on the motion. There's no discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Representative Proctor.
Representative Proctor.
I know the hour's late, but I'd like to say something before we take this vote, if I could.
Please continue.
Yeah, so I think Governor Kelly's plan to mortgage the promise of capers is frankly morally wrong. You know, we're putting at risk the promise we made to our public employees, and we're passing on to some future generation, some future legislature, a huge problem for a small temporary gain. I think this is the worst kind of short-sighted policymaking that makes the people outside this building hate politicians. I really think that, you know, the example that one of the representatives made of this being the same as mortgaging a house is fallacious. You know, that if you mortgage a house and you can't make the payments, you lose the house, but you can go live in an apartment. There's no place that our retirees can go if we are not able to pay on this promise that we've made to them. We're going to destroy their lives. We're going to destroy our credit rating as a state, and we're going to destroy our economy because we're going to have to dig ourselves out of this huge hole that we're making for ourselves. And so I'm going to vote yes on this motion just so that I can get this thing on the floor and get a resounding no from all of my colleagues so that we can kill this idea once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Representative Croft, you may close on the motion.
I close.
You've heard the motion by Representative Croft to pass House Bill 2399 without recommendation. All of those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Would anyone like their vote recorded? Hearing none. Is there anything further to come before the committee? Representative Miller.
We should not adjourn, Mr. Chairman, until we've made an appropriate happy birthday to Representative Toplicker.
I like that idea a lot. You want to sing to him, or did you bring a cake? Okay.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, representatives. Happy birthday, and thanks for joining in. The Zoom thing has to work recorded. That's tough with timing, but I appreciate it. We are adjourned committee until the 10th of March.